My name is Maren Duvall, and I turned 62 last spring. People have always said I'm patient to a fault, someone who sees good intentions where there are none. I suppose that's true. For most of my life, I believed kindness was a language everyone could understand if you spoke it long enough. That illusion ended the afternoon I pulled into my driveway and saw my life strewn across the yard. It was late, gray light, fading behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, the kind of cool Asheville evening that used to calm me. But the calm broke the moment I saw the mess. Cardboard boxes lay ripped open across the grass. My oil paintings leaned face down in the mud. Photo albums split at the spine, their pages fluttering like wounded birds. A framed picture of my late husband, Daniel, lay cracked beneath the porch steps, his smile sliced through by glass. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My hand stayed frozen on the car door. Everything I'd built, everything I'd carried through widowhood and years of work, sat scattered like trash after a storm. Then the screen door creaked. Evan, my son, stood in the doorway holding a black trash bag. His sleeves were rolled up, his face expressionless. "I was cleaning," he said. "Those old things are useless." His voice was so casual it took me a second to understand the words. I thought maybe he was joking, the way he used to when he was little and helped me tidy the garage. But there was no smile this time, only the hard edge of someone who'd already decided what mattered and what didn't. I stepped out of the car. "Evan," I said, my voice low, "these are my things." He shrugged. "You said you were going through them anyway. I just saved you the trouble." I walked past him, my shoes sinking into damp grass, and knelt to pick up Daniel's photograph. The glass bit into my thumb. I brushed the dirt from his face and whispered, barely audible, "So was he." Evan turned away, muttering something about clutter and space. I didn't answer. I gathered what I could, one painting, a box of books, the photo, and placed them in the trunk of my car. The rest I couldn't lift alone. By nightfall, the porch light went out. Through the window, I saw Evan's silhouette move from room to room. The rooms I once painted pale yellow, the rooms where I taught him to draw clouds. I sat in the driver's seat, watching until the lights dimmed completely. I didn't go inside. Instead, I reclined the seat and covered myself with my old cardigan. The air smelled faintly of pine and turpentine, a mix that used to mean home. Somewhere inside, my son was sleeping soundly in a house full of my memories. And outside, under the quiet pulse of the streetlight, I realized I had nowhere left to go, but also nothing left to lose. By morning, I'd made up my mind to start with what was still mine. The next morning, I found myself at the small cafe on Charlotte Street where I used to grade papers between art classes. The smell of roasted beans and baked bread was familiar, grounding. I ordered tea and sat by the window, watching the slow rhythm of Asheville waking up delivery trucks, students, the quiet buzz of a city that had moved on while I was still standing still. I tried to remember when Evan's life had stopped feeling like a shared story and started feeling like a debt. After Daniel's accident, I became both parent and provider. I worked double shifts at the community college, teaching art appreciation to students who were only half awake. Every spare dollar went to Evan's tuition, his first car, his wedding. I signed checks with tired hands, but a full heart, believing every sacrifice was building something solid for him. When he bought the house, I co-signed the mortgage. When the marriage fell apart, I was the one who told him to come home. I remember sitting across from him at the kitchen table, his face pale and lost, the smell of coffee between us. "Just until you get back on your feet," I'd said, signing the temporary living agreement the lawyer had drafted. I didn't even read it closely. I trusted my son. Now that single page sat somewhere inside that same house, his house. He called it like a wound written in ink outside the window. A young man helped his mother out of a car. Steadying her by the arm, she laughed, brushing him off. Embarrassed by the attention, I looked away, tracing the rim of my teacup. Love wasn't supposed to feel this heavy, but silence always adds weight to what should have been said long ago. That afternoon, I drove back to the neighborhood, though not to the house. I parked 2 streets away and walked until I reached the small white gate of Doña Lucia Alvarez's porch. She had lived next door for nearly 20 years, ever since she and her husband moved from New Mexico after retirement. After he passed, she stayed tending her roses, feeding stray cats, keeping an eye on everyone without ever prying. When she saw me at the fence, she opened the screen door right away. "Mija, you look pale," she said, in her warm, lilting accent. "Come in. Coffee's fresh." Her kitchen smelled of cinnamon and old wood. I sat at the table while she poured 2 cups. For a while, neither of us spoke. She finally set her cup down and sighed. "I wasn't sure if I should say this, but I saw what happened yesterday." I looked up. She continued gently. "That young woman, Evan's friend. Yes, she was the one throwing most of the boxes. Laughing, saying, 'We're finally modernizing the place.' I heard her say it twice. Her words landed like stones. I gripped the mug with both hands, feeling the heat against my palms. Lucia hesitated, watching me carefully, but I didn't ask her to stop. She told the movers not to bother with the art. Lucia added, "Said your old paintings made the house look haunted." I stared at the tablecloth's faded pattern, its tiny embroidered flowers. I'd sewn the same design on curtains years ago. The image flickered in my mind, Evan's girlfriend tossing them aside without knowing their story. Without caring, Lucia reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "I'm sorry, Maren." I nodded slowly. The sorrow settled, but underneath it, something else began to take shape. Quiet, sharp, and steady. The next morning, I drove downtown to the Buncombe County Register's office. The building smelled of dust and old ink. Like every piece of paper, there carried a memory someone had tried to forget. I told the clerk my name and asked for the deed to the house on Sycamore Lane. She disappeared behind the counter, leaving me alone with the hum of fluorescent lights. When she returned, she held a thin folder. "Here it is, Mrs. Duvall," she said, sliding it across the counter. My fingers trembled as I opened it. There it was, my name, written in neat, faded type. No transfer, no addendum, no mention of Evan at all. The house was still mine. For a moment, I just stared at the page. I remembered the night Daniel and I had signed the original deed 25 years ago, laughing as the notary stamped it crookedly. He'd said, "It's ours, Mayor." A little tilted, but ours. The clerk asked if I wanted a certified copy. I nodded, and she printed 2. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt sharper, as if the city itself had changed shape around me. I walked 2 blocks to the small law office of Thomas Avery, a quiet man I'd once met at a community fundraiser. He greeted me kindly, listening as I explained what had happened. When I mentioned the joint account, he frowned and turned his monitor toward me. "Do you mind if I check the activity on that account?" he asked. Within minutes, the screen filled with rows of transactions withdrawals, transfers, dates. His voice stayed calm, but the words hit hard. "It looks like your son moved about $42,000 out over the past year. Mostly cash." I pressed my palm against my chest. Not in shock, but in recognition. I had felt something slipping away long before this day. Mr. Avery printed everything, organizing each document neatly. "Keep these safe," he said. handing me a small folder. I looked down at the label he'd typed on its tab. Proof. By the time I reached my car, the folder rested on the passenger seat like something alive. My pulse had steadied, not from fear, not from heartbreak, but from a quiet, deliberate control I hadn't felt in years. Chapter 5. The Dinner Trap. 2 nights later, Evan called. His tone was calm, almost careful. Mom, let's have dinner tomorrow, just us. I want to make things right. I wanted to believe him. When I arrived, the dining room lights were too bright. The table set with polished silverware I didn't own. 4 extra plates waited. Brittany opened the door, smiling too wide. Behind her stood her parents, the Whitmores formal, polite, and curious. We're so happy to finally meet you, Mrs. Whitmore said, her perfume cutting through the air. Evan mentioned you've had trouble adjusting. Adjusting. The word landed like a slap. Dinner felt like a performance roast beef. Nervous laughter, talk of future plans. Then, with practiced sweetness, Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward. Maren, have you thought about simplifying things? There are lovely retirement communities nearby. It would take the pressure off everyone. Brittany nodded. We've even looked at a few gardens. Activities. Evan stayed silent. That silence said enough. I set my fork down. So, you've been planning this. Mom, it's not that I should leave my own home. The room went still. I reached into my bag and drew out the folder labeled Proof. The certified deed slid across the table. This house, I said quietly, is mine. Legally. Entirely. Brittany's smile fell. Mrs. Whitmore froze. Her husband cleared his throat. Looking away, I stood, steady. You're guests in my home, and as long as I live here, I decide who stays and who doesn't. The clock ticked once, then fell silent. Evan looked up, his certainty gone. The room that had been theirs only moments before now belonged to me again. The next morning, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to mean peace but now felt like a pause between storms. Evan arrived just after 9, still in yesterday's clothes. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, his voice low. Mom, can we talk? I gestured toward the kitchen table. The same table where, years ago, I had taught him how to sign his name on his first bank check. Now, another signature waited for him. I laid the papers between us, a formal lease agreement, typed neatly and notarized. You'll pay monthly rent, I said, and we'll begin repayment of the money you withdrew. Mr. Avery drafted it yesterday. Evan frowned, a small, disbelieving laugh escaping his throat. Mom, this isn't necessary. You're making this sound serious, I interrupted. It is. He reached for the first page, still half amused, until his eyes stopped on the attorney's seal stamped in blue. The laughter vanished. This is official, he murmured. It is, I said softly, and so is the damage you did. For a long moment, only the sound of the clock filled the room. Then, without protest, he picked up the pen and signed. His handwriting looked smaller than I remembered, like the boy who used to leave notes on the fridge saying, "Love you, Mom." He pushed the papers back toward me, his jaw tight. I'll send the first payment next week. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. When he left, the door closed with a sound that echoed through every year of my motherhood. I sat down in the empty kitchen, the lease before me like a tombstone for something that had once been sacred. The tears came quietly, not of victory, but of mourning for what love had turned into. 3 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, strained mornings, and silence heavy enough to rattle the walls. Evan sent the first 2 payments on time. No apologies. No words, just numbers on a bank screen. It should have brought relief, but instead, I felt emptied, as if every transaction withdrew something from me too. That afternoon, I stopped at the post office to mail some documents for Mr. Avery. The line was long, the air thick with the smell of rain-soaked coats and old paper. I remember clutching the envelope, feeling dizzy, my breath suddenly shallow. The woman behind me said something, but the words faded. The floor tilted. Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, the light was sterile and white. Machines hummed quietly beside me. My arm ached where a needle fed into a tube. Then I heard a voice, steady, trembling, familiar. Mom. Clara, my daughter from Seattle. I hadn't seen her in over a year. She sat by my bed, her hand covering mine. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but her voice was strong. You scared me, she whispered. The doctor entered soon after, a tall man with kind eyes and the kind of calm that came from delivering hard truths. Often. Mrs. Duvall, your heart's been under severe strain, stress, lack of rest, emotional fatigue, it's all connected. You can't keep living in conflict. Another collapse could be worse. I nodded, feeling the weight of every word. For years, I had built my life around keeping others afloat, my students, my children, my husband's memory. Even now, I'd been fighting battles that weren't mine to win. When the doctor left, Clara squeezed my hand. You need to stop. Mom, please. I turned to her, the words rising from somewhere deep, long buried. Then I'm done saving people who don't want saving. The room fell still. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, not soft, not sweet, but the kind that comes when a heart finally lays down its burden. The storm came without warning, thick sheets of rain drumming against the windows, thunder rolling low over the mountains. I had just finished washing the dinner dishes when I heard the knock. It wasn't the kind of knock that demanded, only the kind that hoped. When I opened the door, Evan stood there, soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders rounded, the confidence gone. For a second, neither of us spoke. Rainwater pooled at his feet, running across the porch boards that Daniel once built. Mom, he said finally, his voice breaking. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, dripping onto the rug, his breath uneven. I offered him a towel, then tea, and waited. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where everything between us had cracked. Brittany's gone, he said quietly. She left last week, took what she could, and disappeared. My accounts are frozen, her father. He had them tied to a business loan. I don't even have a place to stay. He rubbed his face with both hands, the sound of rain filling the silence between us. I know I deserve this, he whispered, but I didn't hate you. Mom, I was ashamed. You kept helping me, and I thought pushing you away made me strong. I sat across from him, the steam from my tea blurring his outline. Strength isn't cruelty, Evan, I said. And love doesn't mean letting someone destroy what's good. He looked up, eyes glassy. I don't know how to fix this. You start by not repeating it. He nodded, tears sliding down his face unnoticed. For a long moment, I wanted to reach out to hold him, to promise it would all be fine. But promises were what had broken us in the first place. When he stood to leave, I followed him to the door. You'll be all right, I said softly. You have to be, but you can't live here anymore. He hesitated, as if the words were a sentence and a mercy at once. Then he stepped into the rain, pulling his hood up. I watched until he disappeared down the street. The night was quiet except for the rhythm of water against the roof, steady as a heartbeat. I closed the door gently, my chest aching but not broken. Spring came slowly that year, soft and forgiving. The azaleas bloomed along the fence line, and the air smelled of rain and clean soil. I started teaching watercolor classes twice a week at the community center. Small groups of women who wanted to paint the world as they remembered it. Their laughter filled the room like music, and I found myself laughing with them. At home, I spent most mornings in the garden. The yard that had once been buried under broken boxes and torn canvases now shimmered with color. The hydrangeas had taken root again, stubborn and bright. Sometimes, while pruning, I'd catch myself talking to Daniel out loud, the way I used to when we planted together. It didn't feel lonely anymore, just honest. On Mother's Day, the mailman brought a small envelope addressed in a handwriting I knew by heart. Inside was a simple card. Thank you for not giving up on me. No signature, but none was needed. I sat on the porch steps for a long time. The letter pressed to my chest, the world around me blurred by quiet tears. Later, I went inside and placed the card beside Daniel's restored photograph on the mantel. His smile seemed lighter now, as if the years between us had thinned. In the afternoon, I opened the windows and let the wind move through the house. The curtains lifted gently, carrying the scent of flowers through every room. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a battlefield or a burden. It felt alive again, rooted, whole, and mine. A full year had passed since that night in the rain. Asheville's summer light had returned, spilling across the hills and filtering through my kitchen windows. The house stood the same as ever. Same porch, same creaking step near the front door. But everything inside had shifted. It was quieter, lighter, filled with air and color instead of tension. That morning, Doña Lucia appeared at my door carrying a woven basket. Fresh pastries, she announced. Her smile bright. I made too many again. She never did anything halfway, especially kindness. We sat on the porch, sipping tea, watching the bees move between the lavender bushes I'd planted in spring. She glanced toward the street, where the mail truck stopped in front of the small apartment complex at the corner. He's there, isn't he? She asked gently. I nodded. Yes. Just a few blocks away. He's been working at the hardware store. Pays his rent on time. Calls sometimes. Lucia reached for my hand, squeezing lightly. You didn't lose your son. Maren, you taught him? I smiled, eyes on the sunlight spreading across the yard, and I taught myself too. After she left, I walked through the house slowly, the way one walks through a museum that still holds traces of the people who built it. The walls were painted a soft ivory now. The smell of turpentine and roses lingered faintly in the air. In the living room, I stood before my newest painting, The Yard Reclaimed. It showed the house as it was that first day, broken boxes, torn fabric, rain-darkened earth, but in the center, a figure bent down, planting something new. The sky above her glowed with the pale gold of early dawn. I hung it above the mantel, right where Daniel's photograph once stood. His image now rested on the side table, framed anew. His smile reflected in the soft light. Outside, the wind stirred the garden, and the petals trembled like small, living hearts. The house creaked, breathing quietly around me, as if settling into its truest shape. It had survived storms, betrayal, and grief, but it still stood. So did I.